Speaking of privatization, one of the great minds of our time, Robert Reich, talked about when it is and is not a good idea to privatize an industry. One thing I like about his breakdown here is that he doesn't fall entirely on one side or the other. He does acknowledge, hey, in some cases, privatization's just fine. It works well, it does its job. Fair enough. But the neoliberal mindset that infected all Republicans, 100% of Republicans, and all of our corporate Democrats, where they believe that the way to make a system efficient is to ensure that somebody in charge of it literally profits off of that system. It has caused the American government to just go crazy and privatize everything they can possibly get away with. Let's have a look at what Robert Reich has to say.
Privatization, 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 privatization. It's all you hear from Republicans. But what does it actually mean?
Whoa, it's quite an intro.
Generations ago, America built an entire national highway system, along with the largest and best public colleges and universities in the world. Also public schools and national parks, majestic bridges, dams that generated electricity for entire regions, public libraries, public research. But around 1980, the moneyed interests began pushing to privatize much of this, giving it over to for-profit corporations. Privatization, the argument went, would boost efficiency and reduce taxes. The reality has been that privatization too often only boosts corporate bottom lines. For example, consider Trump's proposal for infrastructure. The problem is that it depends on private developers who'd make money off of both tax subsidies and private tolls. So the public would get charged twice, without any guarantee that the resulting roads, bridges, or rapid transportation systems would be built where they're most needed. Now, it's true that private for-profit corporations can do certain tasks very efficiently, and some privatization has worked. But the goal of corporations is to maximize profits for shareholders, not to serve the public interest. The question should be, what's best for the public? Now, here are 5 rules of thumb for when public services should not be privatized. Number 1, don't privatize when the purpose of the service is to bring us together, reinforcing our communities, helping us connect with one another across class and race, linking up Americans who'd otherwise be isolated or marginalized. This is why we have a public postal service that serves everyone, even small rural communities where for-profit private carriers often won't go.
All right, I was trying to find the guy's name. It's killing me that I can't remember it, but let's go back just a bit. Okay, quite a bit. Let's see if you can say it again.
The interests began pushing to privatize much of this.
He said in the 1980s, that's when this huge push for privatization began. Yes, it did. Yes, it certainly did. That was when neoliberalism became a massive part of our government. There was an attempt to get it started in the 1970s under Nixon, actually. Now Nixon and the CIA, I hate that this is true American history because it makes you sound like a crazy when you say it, but it's a matter of fact. Nixon and the CIA helped Pinochet get in power in Chile because the previous administration had nationalized the copper industry as well as one other industry. I can't recall which. It scared the hell out of Nixon. It also made Chile an economic powerhouse for a couple of years there. But these were American companies that had owned so much of Chile's resources. So they didn't care for that. They helped produce the coup d'etat that put Pinochet in power And Pinochet followed the tenets of neoliberalism. What happened? An immediate, essentially economic destruction in Chile. They even privatized the country's Social Security, which you will find many Republicans trying to do. The only thing that saved Chile as a country was that they held on to the nationalization of one of the copper companies, and that just allowed them to survive. So then we had the gas crisis, problems when the Middle Eastern countries did not want or did not give sell gasoline to the U.S. anymore because the U.S. supported Israel in Israel's seven-front war with Middle Eastern countries. Set the politics aside, the result of that gas crisis meant we really couldn't kick it off in the U.S. until Reaganomics and deep believers in neoliberalism just ran amok and gutted so much of American industry. Gutted so much of America's production, I should say, by privatizing. Now, on to the what should not be privatized.
Giving it The goal of corporations is to maximize profits for shareholders, not to serve the public interest. The question should be, what's best for the public? Now, here are 5 rules of thumb for when public services should not be privatized.
And also, the instances in the U.S. where they very much are privatized. And you will note they are some of the things that lefties have had the biggest issues with, as in objections to these industries. Have a gander.
Number 1, don't privatize when the purpose of the service is to bring us together, reinforcing our communities, helping us connect with one another across class and race, linking up Americans who'd otherwise be isolated or marginalized. This is why we have a public postal service that serves everyone, even small rural communities where for-profit private carriers often won't go. This is also why we value public education and need to be very careful that charter schools and other forms of so-called school choice don't end up dividing our children and our communities rather than pulling them together.
Betsy DeVos started in the state of Michigan doing that. She was a big proponent of taking money from public schools and giving them in the form of tax breaks, I believe, to parents if they put their children in a charter school. It's a great way to ensure that the community wherein you live doesn't get funding for its schools. It's a great way to ensure that rich parents can grab their kids and say, you're not going to hang out with those filthy poor kids. You're going to get a proper education. And a great way to ensure that the poor kids don't get a proper education. Absolutely shameful. DeVos and her multiple yachts should be just booed everywhere she goes. Literally. She walks in a door, she shouldn't even register the word boo anymore. You ever live by a highway and you stop hearing the whoosh of traffic until somebody reminds you that it's there? That should be Betsy DeVos's whole life from this point forward, except with the word boo. Boo, Betsy DeVos, boo. By the way, her brother Eric Prince is a private military guy. I wonder if that'll turn up in here.
Number 2, don't privatize when the service is less costly when paid for through tax revenues than through prices set by for-profit corporations. America's hugely expensive for-profit health insurance system, for example, is designed to sign up healthy people and avoid sick people, while running up huge tabs for advertising and marketing and giving big rewards to shareholders and executives, which is why the administrative costs of Medicare are a tiny fraction of the cost of for-profit medical insurance.
Now, that's because you're not paying a bunch of people to advertise the products. You are not paying a bunch of people to facilitate, to convince Americans that the best way to run this thing is to have corporatists involved in it. Massive change in the administrative costs. And that doesn't even scratch the surface of the savings that American people would get if we had Medicare for all. We should absolutely, it shouldn't even be a question at this point. We should absolutely nationalize the health care industry in the United States. To give you an idea of how ridiculous our current healthcare system is, 11 of the richest countries on earth were measured and had their healthcare systems compared to each other. The U.S. came in 11th. The U.S. has an absolutely embarrassing healthcare industry, and we should be embarrassed by it. I certainly am. It should not be a question at this point any longer whether or not we should nationalize our healthcare industry. The only question we should be asking, the only debate that should be had on the political stage is whose country's model should we follow. My pitch is Norway because they came in, they got top marks in that survey. But you know what? Canada's isn't bad either. There's a lot to be said for all of these. The only one we know we definitely shouldn't have is our current system. And here's Robert Reich breaking down why. Another way to put this is simply that if you agree that everybody needs the service, everybody requires it, then you've got to stop having the debate over whether or not it should be privatized. The answer is no. If we know everyone needs it, then it must be nationalized, because then we can all agree like reasonable people how it can be distributed, which should mean everybody is able to use it.
And why we need Medicare for all.
Boom.
Number 3, don't privatize when the people who are supposed to get the service have no power to complain when services are poor. This is why for-profit prison corporations have proven again and again to violate the constitutional rights of prisoners, and why for-profit detention centers for refugee children at the border pose such grave risks. Number 4, don't privatize when those who are getting the service have no way to know they're receiving poor quality. The marketers of for-profit colleges, for example, have every incentive to exploit young people and their parents because the value of the degrees they are offering can't easily be known, which is why nonprofit colleges and universities have proven far more trustworthy.
Trump University, as an example. Yeah, for-profit colleges are, I will acknowledge that some have operated in a way that has been beneficial to their students. I still think they should be made illegal. It's like saying some drug dealers have been really helpful to their customers. I bet you got enough of them. I bet some have been, but largely it's a problem. Shouldn't have any for-profit colleges. We should have. I feel, at a minimum, there must always be, at least in terms of colleges, there must always be a nationalized alternative. Even if you want to keep for-profit colleges, fine, but there must be a way that somebody with no money can have a reasonable crack at the American dream. That's supposed to be the point. So let him hit this last one here, and then we got some comments I'm anxious to read.
Number 5, finally, don't privatize where for-profit corporations face insufficient competition to keep prices under control. Giant for-profit defense contractors with power over how contracts are awarded generate notorious cost overruns because they're accountable mainly to their shareholders, not to the public. In other words, for-profit corporations can do some things very well, including, especially, maximizing shareholder returns. But when the primary goal is to serve the public rather than shareholders, we need to be careful not to sacrifice the public interest to private profits.
Big fan of that man right there. No notes, but plenty of additions. First of all, I can't believe I understated how bad the treatment of the post office is. Surreal Edifice says 100 years of benefits in advance. They are funding retirements for people who have not been born yet. Yeah, wild. And a correction issued. Yes, it wasn't 50 years. It was 100 years. That's insane. That is an absolutely blatant attempt to just destroy the post office. One of the services that Americans constantly say they are most satisfied with. It's insane to me that Republicans get away with doing some of the nonsense that they get up to. Real Bill P says DeJoy also disassembled sorting machines. Sabotage mail-in voting, anyone? Just saying. Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. Surreal Edifice says, I remember when Newt Gingrich went on with Aslan Camerota on CNN and got into an argument with her about the facts and told her that he would go with feelings every time. They go by vibes. That is it exactly. Yes. Republicans, their entire political party, I suppose, the career of every Republican is it's reliant upon their audience being either completely uninformed or misinformed. And then, at least up until 2015, they would get a guy that looks just like me and sounds just like me to get in front of a microphone and say some very reasonable sounding things that would result in harm being done to the United States. They'd say things like, we have to protect our country. And what they mean is we have to invade a country that hasn't picked a fight with us. Or they would mean they would say we have to ensure that the post office is run efficiently. And what they would mean is we have to try to sabotage this thing so that we can privatize it. That's what they would mean. But they would say very reasonable sounding things. And they would know that their voters were trained to only listen to Rush Limbaugh, to only watch Fox News, and to therefore not have any idea what was actually going on. It was so bad that Obama installed or created an act that required language in bills to be understandable by average folks if you sit down and read it. And by the way, that has, credit where it's due, that has had a big difference in people's understanding of politics. Although more credit where it's due, of all people, to Donald Trump. Having our lives constantly in danger because of political decisions really got people paying attention to politics. I would encourage you, there's a wicked video on this, I would encourage you, as far as what you can do, to get your MAGA friends familiar with this. It's how do I identify misinformation, disinformation, etc. Consider the source, triple check the source, identify the author, inspect the URL. We always make fun of the fictional freedomeagle.net. That's why. Inspect the URL. Get people used to looking at that. Seek alternative viewpoints. Listen to what the criticisms are of the arguments you find yourself agreeing with. This goes for us too, by the way. Even if you come out the other side of that thinking, no, I'm still on the side I'm on, You then know how the other side is attacking it, and you're better prepared to defend it, should it come to that in a conversation. And then, of course, think before you share. Yeah. Encourage them to do that heartily. So, with privatization, sum up Robert Reich here. To sum up Robert Reich, schools, healthcare, prisons, education, and the military. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. What can you do? You can contact your representative. Pick one of those. I would recommend healthcare because, people should live. Contact your representative and tell them that in your state, you do not want, in fact, go for the gold. You do not want these things privatized. You don't want the healthcare privatized. You have a link in the description. It'll tell you who your governor is, who your representative is from your district, who your 2 senators are. Contact all of them or contact some of them. If you're talking to your governor, keep it towards state issues. Say, I don't want privatized schools in this state. We have an interest in public education. I want public education funded. I don't want private education funded in any way by the government. This constant pressure, this consistent pressure has 2 benefits. One, it pushes them towards your way of thinking. But 2, it also lets them know, even if they are going to fight you, it lets them know that there's people that disagree with what they're trying to do who are active in politics, active enough to look up who their representatives are and to contact them. And then that will temper the ways they try to go against you. Because even if they're not going to try to please you, they might try to not make you that mad. This is how we have our timid Democrats of the modern era. The corporate Democrats who are just gun-shy about doing anything. It's because they grew up in politics. They came about during a time when they would get hammered. They'd get letter campaigns, just absolutely hammered with input from right-wingers. And it was a vicious cycle. They would then do very centrist things, and then they would go to the polls and they'd barely make it back into office or not make it into office. And they'd say, oh, I didn't go right-wing enough. Let's do the opposite of that. Let's adopt the tactics that worked for the bad guys, and let's use it for the good. Contact your representative. Tell them you do not want schools, healthcare, the military, or prisons. Oh my God, especially prisons. Privatized. Further, the easiest thing to say is just to push for Medicare for all. Say, if you're talking to your representative, not your governor, but your representative from your district, tell them, push for Medicare for all. That's what I want. That's why I want you in Washington saying it. It's your job to represent me. I am among your constituents. I want you to push for Medicare for all. I don't want you to push for a half-assed solution. Medicare for all, end of story.